a new book. And the book that he's reviewing today is a book called Lead from the Future: How to Turn Visionary Thinking into Breakthrough Growth. The authors are Mark Johnson and Josh Suskewicz. We're delighted to have Ian as a regular contributor to the Talk to Us Live channel. Welcome, Ian. Great. So Ian is a well-respected strategist and leadership advisor, a seasoned entrepreneur. Yes, he doesn't just lecture on it. He's done it and does it. A prolific consumer of text and a sought-after book critic. So let's get into this afternoon's book. Right. Ian, what is relevant about this book, and what did you find special about it?
Firstly, the book deals with strategy, which I think is the base of any business. If your strategy is wrong, you probably will fail. If your strategy is right, you've got a pretty good chance of succeeding. The reality is that so many long-established companies fail. And the question is, why do they fail? And they're so big, they've got so much going for them, and then they just seem to go away. The real problem seems to be that they couldn't possibly imagine a future without their core product. And these once spectacular companies, which were good enough to be on the Fortune 500, are no longer there and are no longer anywhere. And the issue here that the book tackles is, why did they go away and what could they have done about it? So I think that these people have addressed strategy in an unusual way, in a way that I think we can benefit from now, particularly when people are asking themselves, I really need to take strategy very seriously because I don't know if we're going to make it if we don't.
Sure. So what exactly does present to future thinking do wrong? Isn't that the way we usually do it and how it works?
You see, I think that what we generally do is when you go away on a strategy session, you get together and you have a look at where you are now, and then you say, well, where would I like to be in 5 years' time or 3 years' time? Most people, by the way, are taking a 3-year view of the stuff. 75% of the people surveyed take their planning and forecasting horizons only about 3 years. So they say, where will I be in 3 years' time? You say, well, 3 years' time, the future is not going to be terribly different to the present. In 3 years' time, nothing major is going to change. And we take a lot of the ideas that we're successful at today and seem to extrapolate them into the future. If you look at the future in 3 years' time, you can see the past in it quite easily. It's not that different in almost every single industry. And so we tend to extrapolate and figure that, well, if the 3 years is fine, well, we can just continue like that. And all you do is you get locked into your present, you get locked in with the same views of reality, and you actually don't think very well.
Yeah, it's true, actually. Can you give us some examples,
Yes.
just for the sake of clarity?
Let me give you some good examples. When the newspaper industry realized that the internet was here, what they did was they took the page of the newspaper or the magazine. I only saw magazines, I didn't see newspapers. Only took the pages of a magazine, did a PDF, and put it onto your Kindle. Or your iPad. So what was happening was they were taking a new technology and taking an old technology and just slapping it onto it. In exactly the same way they thought the newspapers were to be read like that. As you compare a static newspaper that's basically your paper newspaper under glass, and compare that with something like Fin24, where you can listen to it, you can see, you can move in and out, you can connect things, completely different level of information coming at you. When TV started, all they did was they actually put a camera in front of a stage and they put on a play and they filmed the play. Now, that's taking the present, it's putting it into the future, and it is a very, very limited way of seeing things.
Okay, I get what you're saying. How do you work backwards, though, from an unclear future, which is where we are now, and how do you plan?
I think that let me give some examples from an industry which is the healthcare industry, because it's quite easy to deal with. Think of it like this: there's a company called Ascension. It's about, I'd say, about 15,000 people employed, and they very, very traditional sort of volume-based hospital business where we'll do well if we have lots of people in our hospital. And they did a study a couple of years back to find out how they were going to remain relevant to the communities that they serve. And what they found was something very interesting. They found that most of their consumers didn't define their idea of health in terms of hospital care and other essential services. Their view of what health was had nothing to do with being sick and being in a hospital. So here was an organization that was really committed to the health of people, and all they were focusing on was hospitals alone. They realized that health is something much broader, and that the way that their customers were thinking about health now had to do a lot with their life goals and their day-to-day needs. And what they would need to do is they're required to transform themselves, have a transformational vision of what the future of healthcare could be, so that they would actually have a role to play in it. Now, another company from the same industry, Janssen Pharmaceuticals. Janssen Pharmaceutical is a division of Johnson & Johnson, monster size, and they envisioned a future in which their innovative drugs will still be very prominent. They're right on the cutting edge of things. But they realized that they would have to do much more. They realized that what they need to do is they need to find novel ways to screen for and to identify people, not who are sick, they're pretty good at that, but for people who are on their way, on the path to a disease. They weren't there yet, but they were on a path to disease. And then they figured what they needed to do was to determine the right moment on this path to disease when they could use an intervention. So what they need to do is they had to over the next 5-10 years, they would need to get really, really good at digital, which would allow them to be able to screen people and identify people who are not ill, but on the path to illness. And then they would need to have consumer-oriented health products for people who aren't yet patients. Just think of this economically. If you're going to said to clever on you, that'll tell you with a 76% accuracy whether or not you're going to get a disease in 5 years' time. Would you mind shelling out 20,000 Rand today for that? And you figure 5 years' time, only 75% chance, I'll take a miss, thanks. If I'm sick, I'll go and spend 20,000 Rand on a cure, but I'm not going to spend 20,000 Rand on a cure, which I'm not even sure I'm ever going to have. Besides which, the other part of the offering was, we'll tell you whether you're going to get that disease with a 75% chance, and we'll also sell you the drugs that will ensure you never get it. Now, how much would you pay for drugs to cure something that you don't have? And the whole economics would now have to be completely different. It would require completely different cost-benefit and risk-benefit trade-offs, because you're offering something not to somebody who's in extreme pain and really prepared to pay a lot of money for the cure, but somebody who's got nothing wrong with them at all. That we will be able to do this is pretty clear, because we're seeing hints of it already. So it's not as if they were imagining a future that doesn't exist. There were hints. So they had to look at how we could get non-patients to take advantage of these solutions to ensure that, and the only way we could do that is to ensure its affordability. If somebody said to you, listen, for the price of a decent bottle of wine, it's $300, why don't you just have your test done and you can see whether you've got a likelihood? And if we do find out that you have this, we'll give you some drugs that cost another 250 Rand. You say, that's a couple of bottles of wine, I'll gladly go for that. So the whole cost ratio thing would have to change.
Sure.
So they're moving into a future in a completely different way, and then they would be able to plan for such a future.
Yeah, okay. But don't most companies do this successfully anyway?
I'll tell you why they don't. You would imagine that companies would do this. Firstly, the authors only deal with monster-sized companies. They're very large by American standards. Bear in mind that a medium-sized business today that's turning over 1 billion or 2 billion Rand is a decent medium-sized business. Mm-hmm. An American business that's turning over 2 billion Rand, how much is that? It's 1/15 of that. Mm-hmm. Is not a big business. It's a tiny business. So what we call big business, the biggest businesses in America are the people that are on the targets of the authors of this book.
Okay.
Even in those situations, very, very few of them actually do this. And there's a lot of reasons for that. If you think of when you talk about, will you know the future? The answer is no, you will not. The future is going to be vague. The future is going to look a lot like the background in front of which you're sitting. There may be something there. We're not quite sure what it is, but we can see that something is there. As we get closer and closer, we'll be able to see it. The most important part of this is that the future is unevenly distributed. In some places of the world, the future is here already. In other places, it's not. And it's not only linked to poverty or wealth. Let me just give you one example. Amazon has got a thing called Amazon Go. Now, this is absolutely fantastic. You walk into the store and you put your phone with your Amazon card in it, and it reads you coming into the store. You walk around the store fully stocked and take anything you want off the shelves, put it in your bag or your pocket, whatever it is, and walk straight out. You don't pay. Everything that you take off the shelf and put on your person or in your bag or close to you is recorded. As you walk out the door, you can look at your phone and you say, oh, that's how much I paid for my shop. But there's no cashiers, there's nothing around there, and the whole thing happens seamlessly. Absolutely fantastic. That's the future. But it's not evenly distributed. That is in a very wealthy environment, one of the richest country in the history of the world at the moment, probably recede if Donald Trump gets a second term. But at the moment, it's fantastic. If you look at something like M-Pesa, M-Pesa is a way of moving money without using a bank and without the bank charges. Now, that is an African invention.
Yes.
That's going to be part of the future of banking. And that was invented here. So we mustn't think that when we're talking about the future, it's always in the developed world. The future's all over, but it's unevenly distributed amongst all of us. There are hints of the future that we can see. So why don't all companies think like this? Because there's too much to it. And if you wanted to do it properly, you'd have to do it in a very structured way. The few companies that they talk about in this book actually have done in a structured way. They would take their top people, a couple of them, put them in a separate area and keep them safe from being interfered with and getting on with the job of identifying the future. The purpose of the future and the purpose of the idea of the future back to the future as opposed to leading from the future backwards is being able to say, if that is the future, what must I do today to be ready for such a future? Because what will happen if you don't do that is the first time the team is going to say, my goodness, look what our competitors are doing. We've got to start. No, your competitors started 4 years ago. You didn't. You can't catch up. Or you'll find some little upstart that didn't have any history and just started coming in there and eating your lunch. So the key is what you're trying to do here is you need to envision a future, and with that future, be able to go back and say, we need to prepare now to be ready for that. The reason why people don't prepare, it's not that they don't talk about this. I've discussed with quite a few clients, and they said to me, yes, and I am worried about this stuff. We do have conversations about this sort of thing. I'm sure they do. They don't have structured conversations. Today, I just finished one with a client. When you have a structured conversation around this that's leading in a particular direction, at the end of the series of structured conversations, they will be able to say, we know that we need to spend maybe 5% or 10% of our time and our energies getting this stuff right. And we need to start now getting closer to what we imagine that vague future looks like, because the future will be like an impressionistic painting, vaguely, and it's not absolutely clear. But if you start working on that now, you've got a chance of success. There are a lot of people who've tried to do this stuff badly. So let me just tell you what not to do. It's still around today, a research center called PARC, Palo Alto Research Center. It's owned by Xerox. They invented everything. They invented icons. They invented land. They invented the mouse. They invented a whole bunch of things. Everybody except Xerox got them. What they'd done was they were so far away from where the heart of Xerox was a separate area. They were too far away. And because of that, they didn't have any real influence on the business, which is why I like the idea of working with the top team. because whatever you're going to come up with, it's all, we'll select different people to do different parts of what has, but it's the guys who actually are doing it, who are going to be, have come to the conclusion that should be done. On the other hand, you had something, Apple had a separate section where, I don't remember what they called it, but it always had the Jolly Roger flag flying. It was a separate division where people could like really get out and think without being annoyed by accountants and project managers. 3M was very successful in doing this. They actually bought a farm, which used to be a dairy farm, and it's now being used by people who do strange and curious things. When somebody, for example, wants to invent glue that doesn't really stick, with Post-its, right? That guy's loony. And he will go to the funny farm on weekends or at nights or whatever, because that's a place, they're called the funny farm. But the fact is that if you can keep these things to some degree separate from what your day-to-day business is, so it doesn't impinge on your day-to-day business, you've got the best chance of success. But at the same time, if it's too far away from your day-to-day business, like it was at Palo Alto, you're not going to make this thing happen. Okay. There's also a whole bunch of other reasons why people don't succeed at this.
It's actually quite interesting when you talk like this. It makes you realize the challenge that schools face, because they're doing exactly this. They're trying to prepare people for a future that is unknown.
Yes.
And there's a lot of that happening in the school system at the moment, where they're saying, well, what does the future look like? What are the skills that the children will have to have as adults? And often people just think they're making a big molehill, big mountain out of a molehill. Yeah. But I do think now, when you mention it, that's a very similar analogy, isn't it? Schools Indeed. Are having to do this all the time, because they're supposed to be producing young people who are educated for a modern time, which is a future when they start their child's education that they may not know.
And I think that the problem with schooling is you're taught by a teacher who went through 12 years of schooling and 3 years of college.
Yeah, like 20 years ago.
and now she's going to get people ready for living in a completely different future. So the whole thing becomes quite complex.
It does.
And it's hard to get, even at universities. I have quite a good association with UNISA, and I've had an opportunity to spend some time with their deans and directors of college, talking about where they would have to position, where they have to be. And what the refrain that keeps coming up again and again is that the best of the professors that are there have got an awful predilection towards being intelligent academics. And which is terrific for PhD students, but absolutely lousy for the majority of students who are undergraduates.
Sure.
And as somebody who studied, I won't tell you exactly where, not in this country, at a university where lecturing to students was a chore that you had to do to be allowed to do your research. That's why they didn't care about the quality of teaching. That stuff comes through. So I think we need to have this. It doesn't matter whether you're in education or in clothing or anything at all, supermarketing, anything at all. You need to say, where will the future be that I should be preparing myself today for, so it doesn't come and bite me too late when I can do nothing about it. And that's why I like this book.
That's a really excellent book, and it's sort of broadened one's minds in a number of ways. I think I'll definitely make a plan. I don't know whether I'll get to read it in 1 week, but I'll give it a bash. But Ian, as always, thank you so much for such an interesting insight into the book and your views on really what's happening in the business world and how you relate the business world to what you've seen in the book. Thank you so much again, as always, for your time, and we're looking forward to meeting with you next week.
Thank you.
So, thank you. Right. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. And we will put the details of the book in the comments below so that you can find it if you missed the cover, which we showed right in the beginning. And other than that, I think please like this If you enjoyed the book, share it. If you think someone else could benefit from, but most importantly, talk to us. Ian's details are also available on the details below, and he is from Gateways Consulting, so you can always look at his website. Thank you very much for your time. Good